We have the signed agreement right here. There is no ambiguity in this language, Ethan. You need to move the fence immediately or we will pursue legal action. As you can see on the map here, the proposed fence line clearly encroaches on the common area. We cannot approve this without a variance vote.
This plat map clearly showed the discrepancy we discussed regarding the property line, which complicates the deed transfer. We have the original county plat here, and here, the altered survey. The discrepancy at the border is quite clear.
The courtroom went silent the moment the county record appeared on the screen. Karen Whitmore, the Homeowners Association president, had spent months acting like the boundary line belonged to her. She had filed the lawsuit. She had pushed the notices. She had walked into the courtroom certain that Ethan Cole would lose a strip of his own land. Then Daniel Hayes slid a yellow document into view, and the entire room changed. The line Karen had spent weeks defending was wrong. Worse, the paper she had built her case on was contradicted by a record she had signed years earlier. Her confident expression vanished. The judge leaned forward, and Ethan realized, with sudden clarity, that Karen had not just made a mistake. She had dragged the wrong man into court with the wrong boundary, the wrong records, and the wrong version of the truth. Ethan had bought the house 6 years earlier, drawn by the quiet street, the mature trees, and the kind of neighborhood that looked calm from the outside. The driveway was narrow. The fence was old, and the backyard felt private in a way that mattered to a man who preferred peace over attention. He worked hard, kept his place neat, paid his dues on time, and expected the Homeowners Association to be little more than background noise. That expectation disappeared the moment Karen Whitmore became president. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything and forgave nothing. She complained about his front door color, his driveway edge, the roots of a maple tree, and even the angle of his security camera. Each complaint was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern. Karen seemed to treat the neighborhood like her personal territory, and every meeting gave her a little more confidence. Ethan learned to ignore her whenever he could, hoping she would eventually move on to someone else. She never did. Her attention kept returning to his property, as if she had decided his yard was the place where her authority would be tested. The first real strike came on a gray afternoon when Karen walked onto Ethan's property with a clipboard, a folder, and the hard expression of someone who had already made up her mind. She pointed to his fence and claimed it crossed onto Homeowners Association land. She held up photographs, a marked-up survey copy, and a set of written notices as if they were undeniable proof. Ethan stayed calm, but the accusation landed like a punch. The fence had been there when he bought the house. The survey stakes had never moved. The county markers matched the line exactly. None of that mattered to Karen. She handed him a formal complaint demanding a response within 30 days, then left as if the matter had already been settled. Inside the envelope was something worse than a complaint. It was a lawsuit. The association was accusing him of violating the boundary, damaging community property, and refusing to obey prior warnings. Ethan stared at the pages at his kitchen table, reading the same lines again and again, trying to understand how a fence that had never moved could suddenly become the center of a legal war. Karen did not slow down after filing. She intensified. More notices appeared on Ethan's door. The wording changed, but the goal stayed the same: pressure him until he gave in. She claimed his driveway overlapped disputed land. She claimed the fence had to come down immediately. She claimed the neighborhood had been harmed by his refusal to cooperate. At the next association meeting, she stood beneath fluorescent lights and projected a map showing his fence several feet inside supposed association property. Several board members nodded along. A few neighbors accepted the story because Karen delivered it with total confidence. Ethan watched the room tilt in her direction and understood that confidence could be used like a weapon when no one checked the records closely enough. That night, he called Daniel Hayes, the real estate lawyer who had handled his home purchase years before. Daniel listened, then began tracing every record tied to the property: the deed, the plat map, the original survey, the association filings, the meeting minutes. At first, the paperwork looked ordinary. Then one detail stood out. Karen's version of the boundary did not match the county archive. The case was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It was starting to look like something had been altered. And then Daniel found a second inconsistency. The disputed strip of land was not random. It sat beside a section of the neighborhood Karen had quietly been trying to redevelop. A walking path, new landscaping, a future commercial parcel the board had never formally approved. If the original boundary stood, the project collapsed. If the boundary shifted, the association gained valuable land. That was the moment the pressure became personal. Karen kept escalating, certain that noise and paperwork would force Ethan into retreat. But Daniel found the first decisive clue in an archived association file. An older board resolution confirming the original boundary years before Karen became president. Buried at the bottom was her own signature. She had approved the very line she was now suing to erase. The more Daniel compared, the clearer the pattern became. Karen had relied on incomplete records, and those incomplete records happened to benefit her development plan. The lawsuit was no longer just aggressive. It was built on a line she had already acknowledged in writing. By the time the trial date arrived, Karen still believed she was arriving to watch Ethan lose. The courtroom looked ordinary until the evidence began to stack up. The association opened with the altered survey, the notices, and the photos. Karen sat rigidly behind her attorney, looking satisfied, as though the case had already been won. Then Daniel took over. He laid the county plat map next to the association's version. The two boundary lines did not match. He showed the original deed, the archived survey, and the older association resolution. Then he placed Karen's own signed document on the screen. The room shifted. Karen had signed off on the original boundary years earlier, before she ever held the presidency, before the redevelopment plan, before the complaints became a campaign. The judge studied the records, then the signatures, then the discrepancy. Karen's expression hardened into something smaller and less certain. The final blow came when Daniel connected the timeline. The altered survey, the board changes, the boundary push, and the lawsuit all lined up around her rise to power. The legal confidence that had filled the courtroom drained out of the plaintiff's side in a matter of seconds. When the judge dismissed the case in full, Ethan felt the weight finally lift from his shoulders. Karen had spent months trying to rewrite reality. The paperwork said otherwise. The ruling ended the lawsuit, but it did more than that. The association was forced to correct its records, remove the altered survey, and revise its internal procedures so no boundary dispute could move forward without original county verification. The board members who had supported Karen began asking questions they should have asked from the beginning. Her authority evaporated almost overnight. Within weeks, she stepped down as president. Ethan kept his fence. He kept his driveway. He kept the land he had always owned. But more importantly, he got his peace back. The neighbors who had avoided him started looking him in the eye again. The street felt lighter. The tension that had hung over the block for months finally faded. Karen did not disappear from the neighborhood, but she no longer carried herself like someone who could bend the place to her will. The same documents she had ignored became the reason she lost everything she tried to control. In the end, one forgotten signature mattered more than all her complaints, and that left one question hanging over the entire story. How many neighborhood battles would never happen if people checked the original records before they let pride turn into a lawsuit?